first, before we do that, I want to do some introductions. Nadine, you want to give us a little background about your
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nadine Manjaro. I'm the CEO of Beyond M2M Communications. I've worked in IoT for the last 7 years, but my broader background has been in telecom for about 20 years. Don't want to date myself. But I've worked as an independent consultant. I've worked for system integrator partners for carriers like Verizon, worked with Telefonica. So I've been in this space for quite some time, and I've worked as an independent, as a specific consultant with large enterprise customers, such as Pepsi, Bobcat, and several others.
Thank you. Sam?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Lucero. I'm an industry analyst with IHS Markit, and I have covered machine-to-machine and IoT since 2005, mostly on the cellular IoT side. IHS Markit is an industry analyst firm covering a range of transformative technologies. We're part of a larger IHS group that has IHS Energy, IHS Automotive, and a lot of research, for example, in chemicals and the oil and gas sector. So my research is mostly targeted toward suppliers of technology, but I'm very interested to speak with all of the end users here in the one-to-one meetings and learning more about how you are perceiving the technology, how your organizations are adopting the technology, and I think it's going to be a series of really good conversations, so thank you.
Thank you. And Daniel?
Daniel Obodovski. I run a company called Silent Intelligence. I've been doing IoT since before I knew it was called IoT, and anybody else knew it was called IoT, or machine-to-machine for that matter. I used to work at Qualcomm and launched a lot of products in transportation logistics, dedicated tracking platforms, had to kind of pull the whole ecosystem, bring a lot of partners together, retailers, manufacturers, carriers, application service providers, and so on. Right around 2012, with a friend of mine, decided to write a book about the Internet of Things, mostly for educating ourselves, called The Silent Intelligence, which came out in 2013. And right after that, got pulled in a lot of projects to help companies figure out their IoT strategy. CTO of Samsung Electronics and multiple other companies. Decided not to go back into the corporate world and continue building my own consulting company, which is what we have right now. We're a team of experts. We help our clients answer the questions, help us understand the problems my technology is helping to solve in manufacturing, in retail, in transportation logistics, in utilities and smart cities. And also help me understand the value of the data that we have and the value of the data we're about to get, and how is it going to help our processes, how is it going to help us our relationship with our customers, how is it going to help our channel partners. So that's basically what we do.
Thank you. So we talked about Industry 4.0 earlier, and I wanted to ask Sam, because I know Sam's going to be presenting later, can you give us your definition of Industry 4.0? What does that actually mean to us?
Well, I think Industry 4.0 is taking connectivity technologies, taking robotics, and taking analytic systems, including machine learning-based systems and AI, and putting those together in a way that dramatically increases the efficiency of operations. The underlying goal, put simply, is to move from mass production to mass customization. In other words, become so efficient that production of batch level 1 becomes possible.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to dive in. I have some questions for the guys. This is for all of you. So can you talk about 3 notable trends that you're seeing occurring in the industry? And I want you to also see if you can tie that back to manufacturing and industrial industries that we have, with our audience today. Nadine, you want to start?
Sure. I think with IoT, everyone started with connecting things. So I think now they've connected a lot of things and they're getting this data. And I think many of the companies now are in this spot of how do we make sense of this data? How do we use machine learning to take advantage of the information coming off the machines that we're tracking. So before it was more specific use case. So for example, I worked on one with a large large manufacturing company, and they were trying to track their injection molding process. So I started off with just looking at the outcomes from monitoring the program logical control boards, getting the data off of it, and then locating where the assets are. To now we have this data, how do we improve the business operations from that information? So I think it was connecting things now, how do we, like Sam was saying, how do you make sense of that data to improve operations, to improve the product, create the next generation products, and so forth.
Good. How about you, Sam?
So I would say wireless wide area technologies that are optimized for IoT is a worldwide trend that I think is going to dramatically scale up the ability to connect devices in the wide area in a very mobile, cost-effective fashion. I think the entrance into IoT over the past 2 to 5 years of very significant companies, mainstream IT, OT companies focusing on IoT is going to help increasingly solve some of the problems, for instance, that this gentleman here talked about in terms of needing suppliers that can support at scale globally, being able to bring together ecosystems to provide very robust solutions. I think a third is the increasing focus on the need for effective cybersecurity mechanisms. We hear cybersecurity time and again cited as the top or one of the top concerns that companies and organizations implementing IoT have, and I think that the value chain is very focused on trying to solve and ameliorate those challenges. So I think those are three. There's many, but those are three that come to mind.
That's good. Thank you. Daniel, what do you have, Joe?
And I agree with Sam and Nadine, and with Sam especially. I mean, it's really hard to determine three specific trends. Plus, they already mentioned quite a few very important ones. But I would say probably number one is verticalization. That probably started maybe last year and kind of became more this year, where technology companies are realizing that whatever they've been providing, whatever the horizontal platform or solution, doesn't quite work. They need to understand which verticals. Is it for manufacturing? Is it for transportation logistics? Is it for utilities? And how does it connect to the problem they're actually solving? So technology companies start like really focusing, even if they're just a semiconductor company or a hardware company, seriously thinking how what they do solves a problem in a particular vertical industry. So that's one trend that we've seen very strongly this year. A trend number two, which is a technology trend, but goes way beyond the technology, is edge analytics. I think it kind of people started talking about edge analytics last year, but this year we've seen it really grow rapidly in terms of like volumes of edge gateways. And I think Dell is in the audience, right, somewhere. So that's a great example, but many other companies as well. So what is it about? It's about moving the decision making from the cloud, from far away, closer to the asset, or closer to where the decision needs to be made. And that kind of causes the whole bunch of questions. Which decisions do I need to make at the edge versus in the cloud? What's more important? What's less important? What can wait? And so on and so on and so on. So we're going to see a lot going on along those lines in the upcoming months and years. And have any of you heard about mist computing?
Mist computing.
Yeah, so that's kind of a very, very new trend. People just starting talking about that. And that's kind of moving from the edge, which is between the cloud and the asset, actually moving decision making right into the asset itself. But that's not the third trend, because the third trend is actually, I would describe as, so many of our clients in the industry starting realizing that whatever business they've been in, they're now moving into a data business. And what does it mean? That means they need to start thinking seriously about the value of their data, not just for themselves, not just for their operations, but also what else can they do with that data. Is there anybody from their customers, suppliers, partners, or anybody else that can have value of the data? How can they price it, and how can they sell it? And that's also a very, very important trend.
That's good. I think I've heard that quite often is, are we making money? Are we creating new, even new revenue models with the data that we currently have, something that we wouldn't even have thought of before? And some companies are doing that, and some of those are disrupting the industries as well. So let's move on to, looking forward. I know we're talking a lot about what's happening now. Let's talk a little bit about moving forward. What are some things we should be thinking about future tech? What should we be watching for? What should we be planning for those in our audience? Anything that jumps out?
I think, I was going to say the security, like Sam mentioned, has always been an afterthought. And I think, now when the solutions are deployed, you can't go back and attach security onto it. So I think going forward with the newer solutions, they have to build it from the ground up. And I don't know how you go and retrofit what's already out there, but it has to be something that's planned into it. Because I've worked on projects too where it was after it's deployed, then let's see what security mechanisms are available to attach to it. So I think upfront thinking about that and implementing that on a consistent basis.
I think to touch on a point Daniel just made around how data becomes central to an organization's activities, I think extending that to a model where that data can potentially become federated out on exchanges, marketplaces. We're really, for the most part, not there yet, but I think that will really mark an inflection point to a true Internet of Things. I mean, right now, realistically, what we have are a collection of intranets of things, and these technologies are deployed oftentimes in a very siloed fashion, and the data is kept very siloed. And there are a lot of good reasons in corporate environments for data to be kept in-house, close to the vest. But there's going increasingly to be the ability for data types of data that don't have to be kept so tightly close to the organization, to have that data be sold, to be shared, to be used by third parties to develop new applications, to develop new ways of providing value to the ecosystem. One example that comes to mind is a fleet management company that put on tractor trailers sensors, environmental sensors, and this was as part of a fleet management solution. The primary value is enabling fleet management functionality of the type that Stephanie illustrated for that client. But the data of all of those trucks traveling around the country were valuable to third parties in the sense of local environmental conditions, and being able to take that up and make use of it. IBM's acquisition of the weather company to provide weather data in conjunction with other types of services and data has had a tremendous influence in how many local and state organizations in Florida and Texas responded to the recent hurricanes. So I think that the more we can expand beyond the limited SCADA proprietary type systems and really bring in and ingest massive volumes of data, a lot of these new sets of data are going to be able to be federated out, and I think that's really when we're going to see a lot of the transformative effects of the Internet of Things.
Daniel, you have something to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nadine, what she said about security. I think people have been talking about security for a while, but it's been like an afterthought. And I think this year, what we've seen is it's becoming real. Companies started to recognize it. A great example is Maersk. You guys familiar with what happened with Maersk in June? They got hacked, right? They got hacked. And the problem with that was not only that whatever third parties got access to their proprietary data, but their whole data system got disrupted as a result, and for a while they had no idea where the containers were. And that was probably the worst impact. So after that, and we've been in conversations with Maersk and many other companies, but they started taking security on a totally different level, right? I mean, security, like waiting for the moment until you get hacked and then doing something is not the best way to go about it. Because it's not just somebody like reading your data. It's somebody who's potentially disrupting your operations. So that's what we call like something we need to watch out for the future, for sure, starting like today or yesterday, right? And maybe from like another things to watch out in the future, artificial intelligence. It's developing so fast that when you're thinking about your data and your data analytic algorithm and everything, if you're not thinking about how you can apply artificial intelligence, whether you're talking about machine learning or deep learning on any other forms, on how is it going to affect your data analytics, how is it going to affect your data, you're making a big mistake. And you need to start thinking about pretty soon, because big changes are happening in the area right now.
I would add also specific to our to manufacturing is robotics. And I think that historically we think about robotics, we think about it on the factory floor, we think about it for processing, but now we're seeing robotics enter into the mainstream for, do I think it's going to make a lot of people money on the mainstream? No, but I think it's also going to give us a lot of learning about how to leverage artificial intelligence and pulling some of these pieces together with AI and robotics combined to provide different services and outside of manufacturing. But on the factory floor, I think we're going to see some interesting robotics applications really start to infiltrate all, throughout the supply chain and distribution, shipping, logistics, lifting, moving materials outside of just that factory floor and that factory the factory side of the house. So I think that's something we should definitely look for. There's some very interesting companies that are smaller, but that are doing some very big things in robotics. And I also expect that to be an area of acquisition for some tech companies that are looking at applications.
And I just wanted to add to that. When we talk about things like robotics or things like artificial intelligence, the first reaction is like something out there, something from a sci-fi, like delivery drones. Like, can you imagine like swarms of drones, flying around and bringing our packages? But not necessarily that way. If you think about it differently, I had kind of this conversation with Amazon, and say like, when is it going to happen? When are you going to be have all those drones flying around? So just think about one van with the one delivery guy or gal who are delivering your package, and there's one drone that while the person is delivering a package, the drone is delivering another. We just increase the capacity by 50%. That's all. Don't worry about multiple drones. Just that is going to dramatically improve the supply chain. Just something to think about.
Now we want to open it up to questions.
Hello, Asish Klar, Bioteam, Life Sciences Consultant specializing in infrastructures, hardware, software. Can you comment on blockchain and its potential use? It's taking off. There is a lot of comments out there, how it can be used for medical record management, for instance, ledgers, confirmation of unique records, and have you had any experience in your practice?
Only way I've seen it in from a security standpoint. They talk about it because of the distributed ledger system, that it could help to improve the security of IoT from that perspective. But I haven't seen it much in real applications, but a few of the vendors mention it in their solution. So I don't know if it's just the buzzword of it, but from a security perspective, that's where I've seen it applied.
I would agree. I think I think it's a pretty big buzzword right now, but they're taking what they're learning on the financial side and looking at how does this work and how can we apply this to other areas, and I think we're at that early stage right now. But you see a lot of that buzz right now. I don't know of any core applications.
Yeah, so we will looked at a few areas with blockchain, supply chain logistics, one of them, especially like when you have like controlled substances or anything like this that you need to track, where pedigree is very critical. Because what blockchain essentially gives you, it gives you a great, very secure way to track the origin of any transaction, right, and monitor all the transactions. So there's a lot of testing happening as we speak right now to applying this to various supply chain applications. Where else? Security, as it was mentioned, is definitely applicable there. But I haven't seen any commercial implementation yet, but it's probably going to happen soon. That's what it feels like.
One additional thing, it may be in validating the integrity of the data. Because if you have analytics, if it's just as good as the data that you're getting. And so I think it's being considered to validate the integrity of the data that you get.
Over here.
I guess I'll reintroduce myself. Eric Fleming, lead data scientist for Arizona Public Service. I do have a question. When you start bringing in Internet of Things, smart homes, smart devices, wearable technology, what do you see will be the regulatory impact on all of this data, whether in terms of personally identifiable information, the handling, the maintenance, the expectations of firms that use this information? So once you take it outside of the manufacturing plant or the industrial setting and you start bringing it into the realm of the customer, do you see that there will be any regulatory shifts that are going to have to accompany this?
I can comment on that. I think there's a lot of value in some of the data that we do have at the utility level or at the government level. But that's one of the biggest, I think, roadblocks right now. And I know you mentioned that privacy and concern is the lashback that we get from consumers and end users. Today, we opt into a ton of applications that say, yeah, you can have access to my pictures, my files, my contacts. Every day you download an app, you're saying yes to all of that. And I think we might get to a point to where in order to do business with some of these companies, they're going to have a lot of opt-in requirements and measurements in place that might not necessarily be visible to the consumer. I do think that the consumer protection organizations and everyone that's kind of protecting consumer privacy and data in healthcare, HIPAA, and some other things, we're going to see some intervention simply because consumers will fight back. We see court cases every day around that access to private information. But we're moving into that realm where our information is being shared. And I think there are only a few industries where we have tighter regulatory controls, and I would say healthcare, government, and utilities, and education kind of fall into those categories. Outside of that, retail and other industries, I think it's just wide open. And then they're going to wait and see what happens from the consumer perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with IoT, and me not being involved in IoT, looking at it from the inside, the outside in, is that it's really moving fast, and it's technology driven. And it sort of reminds me of the early days of the PC industry, when people really didn't know what to do with the PC, but everyone's telling you to buy one anyway because you'll find a way to use it. I think there's a lot of effort being made on putting sensors everywhere. In fact, I looked at a report from TechCrunch about half an hour ago and reading about ingestible IoT devices. Well, that's great, but let's decide, let's try to deconstruct that and start with the end user, start with the patient or whatever, and then move backwards and see if there's really a need for that. I had a very interesting conversation back in August with a data scientist with Nissan, and of course they're into connected cars. They're connecting cars with smart cities, and so his biggest fear is machine learning, because the cars are talking to everything. They're talking to buildings, they're talking to roads, they're talking to each other, and they have to employ intelligent systems and machine learning into that to keep everything organized. Because they did a study in England, and they found out that there really shouldn't be any traffic incidents or problems at all if drivers were taken out of the picture. They did a study on a rotary, of cars going around a rotary, and if one car slows down by about 2 miles per hour, a traffic jam happens. So with connected cars, it won't happen. Ideally, it will never happen, because you take the human element out of their cars to talk to each other. Here's the issue. We're not thinking about regulations and implications. So the solution is machine learning, but machines are learning as they go along. They're going to make mistakes. And so the question I rose to him was, okay, so say you have all these cars talking to each other and the road is going very, very smoothly. What if a dog runs across the road or a person runs across the road? And machine learning, as it's learning, what's the prime directive for that machine or that system is to keep the traffic moving. So what happens if that person or that dog becomes expendable? If traffic can't stop and that person is getting in the way of that traffic. That's the issue, and this scares the hell out of this guy from Nissan, because we're moving so fast towards that without thinking about the implications. So that's, somebody raised the issue of regulations before and security. That's important as well. But I'm thinking implications. If you think back of that terrible accident, and I think it was, Elon Musk's company, and they were
Tesla.
testing the driver, Tesla, testing the truck or the car, and Elon Musk was very cold and calculating, saying, well, it was the driver's fault, he should have been paying attention. No, you should have thought of the implications. The driver was in this car, in the passenger seat, shouldn't have been there in the first place. But the system, the machine learning system, as it's learning, a white truck passed across the road. It thought it was the horizon. The car went under the truck, the person was decapitated. So these are the things we have to think about. And people aren't expendable in this whole thing. And that's my fear out there, is that machines are going to learn very quickly, but what are they learning? What's the end result? So think about that.
From that, they had to optimize it, right? To know if there's a white truck next time.
The life has already been lost.
Yeah.
Now what?
That's
Yeah.
why I don't want to be the first person to try it.
I'll wait. I will wait.
Hello, my name is Jamal Udin. I'm just wondering that IoT means that portfolio of things, lots of things happening in the technology, connections, and Stephanie showed lots of companies which are big, short companies doing lots of things with IoT. So can you actually give us some example where people are going outside of these small, big companies and trying to develop something very innovative so that we can also participate on that kind of activities in a smaller scale, so that we can get motivated by some examples?
Are you talking about like smaller scale trials and pilots and projects?
Yes,
where you
novel things, yes.
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, this, getting involved with some of the standards bodies and the organizations, because that's where you learn about a lot of the pilots and projects that are taking place. Also, connecting with some of the vendors that are kind of managing some of those projects, and I think we all kind of know a list of some of those, of who they are. There's some companies out there that are also funding projects, and that's one kind of a feedback I got around smart cities. I was speaking to somebody who's used to work for me, who works for now the city of Atlanta, and he said the whole problem with smart cities right now is that there are very big companies that are willing to provide funding to pilot projects within their city, but once you receive that dollar bill, you can't do business with that company because of conflicts of interest and requirements within that government entity that they can't do a contract with them. So, some of these pilots and some of these smaller scale activities are at that phase, knowing that that vendor might not even be able to actually monetize the bigger picture. But you guys have anything to add?
I would say one thing that was surprising to me was the Department of Homeland Security. And if you were to go to their website and look at some of the BAAs or the different things that they put out there for bidding, they're quite interesting, they're quite innovative. So one of the things was for first responder, and they had a challenge where when first responders enter a multi-story building, they aren't able to locate them. There's been an incident where the first responders got lost in the fire, and resulting in death. And so they wanted to develop a system that, first of all, could pinpoint where they are. With RF technologies, you couldn't really use it because their signal degradation depend on the building material and on all of those things, and smoke and all of those things impact it. So they developed this thing called Pointer that they use magnetic field to locate the firefighters inside a burning building. And that was done between DHS and NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. So they have some really cool things going on. Another thing that they were looking at, again, was in-building mapping, which is a big gap, right? So you have GPS outside and everything, but inside the building, especially multi-stories, it's difficult to map it. And they wanted to be able to do that real time in 3D. So I think if you were to take a scan at some of those, even DHS site, you can see some really cool things that they're looking for. And if you attend some of the sessions, you see really innovative things going on. So I think that's one area.
Yes.
From a DHS perspective, any organization, they put challenges out on a regular basis, and anybody can go out, and it's a really quick turnaround. They try to turn around in 6 weeks and do a response. You get an interview with them, then a quick write-up, and you'll get seed money very quickly if you answer some of their challenges to move forward. And then there's funding given on an incremental basis if you meet the requirements. So they're along IoT, they're along some other areas also, but they're probably one of the leading federal government agencies that are looking at IoT and ways to benefit and work with commercial entities.
I would say also, look, a lot of the bigger cities have innovation labs and have startup communities and startup, cohabitation spaces, co-spaces, co-working spaces, and that's where a lot of the smaller startup companies, I know in Austin they have Capital Factory, but a lot of the bigger cities have those hubs, and a lot of times those are great resources to find out some of the smaller scale projects. There's lots of competitions where you can compete for free. Some of them there's prize money, some if you win you actually get to work with the larger vendor who's sponsoring those particular projects. I know CES has some innovation startup competitions there. A lot of the big conferences have, adjacent startup community and innovation contests where you can and I think they're great. I like to attend them just because I like to see what's cutting edge, because sometimes innovation, the biggest innovation I'm seeing is at these small startup companies that no one knows about.
But you brought up an interesting point. With the edge computation and with the smart vehicles, they're basically computing with a terabyte of data. What is the direct impact on our network and communications infrastructure? At what point and who or what entities would drive towards edge computing and that cognitive edge intelligence to offset that? Because what we found, for example, is when we brought an electric car on the grid, we thought, wow, this is a wonderful thing, we're going to bring an electric car on the grid, and then we set up the points of charging and realized that every electric car on the grid is equal to one house. And we realized, what do we do? And now we're facing Internet of Things, all these different forms of sensors, and we're realizing we are going to be flooded with so much information. Will it overwhelm our cellular backhaul systems? Will it overwhelm our forms of current communication? Who drives that, and what's the implication to that?
Well, there's a fundamental underlying shift happening in the mobile network core now called NFV, SDN, and essentially, and this is not only for IoT, it's for the underlying shift to eventually 5G systems, where a lot of the network elements are essentially being virtualized. So you take white label server computing equipment and put the intelligence to manage the traffic in a software environment. And what that happens, what that does for the IoT is it allows for a very flexible reconfiguration or deployment of a network that is tailored for the needs and the use profiles of IoT applications. So you can even carve out essentially an IoT separate core mobile network. And in fact, that's what carriers like Verizon do today. So the increasing flexibility that the mobile core will have is one aspect to addressing that. And I think another aspect, to touch again on Daniel's point about edge computing, is that there is very concentrated work underway to further specialize chips for AI, and with the ultimate goal of trying to embed AI deeper out into the environment. So eventually AI is not, something just sitting in the cloud. AI is really inculcated into a wide range of local devices. So going from originally CPUs to graphics processor units, now there's a generation of AI-specific processors that are starting to be introduced. And so that's another aspect. It's sort of make things more flexible in the cloud and provide better capability to keep data at the edge.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. So to give a short answer to your question, who's going to drive the edge computing? And the answer is you. And the reason for this answer is, so basically today we have about a dozen of IoT gateway manufacturers, maybe a little bit more, but a few of them are actually seriously looking into edge computing and building edge computing platforms, which include pretty sophisticated data analytics tools, but very importantly, they include the hierarchical tools that allows you, especially if you have a lot of those gateways in the field, allows you to separate what's going to be handled, what part of data is going to be handled at the edge, and which part of it is going to be sent to the cloud. And also include visualization tools that allows you to see how this data is being distributed. But who's going to decide which data is going to be managed on the edge and which in the cloud? That's not the edge manufacturers. That's you guys. That are the ones who are actually running your operations, because they cannot make those decisions for you. And this is the decisions that you need to be making.
I would also add, too, is that from a connectivity perspective, I think sometimes we get into our mindset that everything needs to be cellular. And we do have other alternatives, especially if you have something in a fixed location. And sometimes that also helps alleviate some of that wireless backhaul. I think also there are, we talked about LoRa and some of the things that are happening with other connectivity options for things that need to be scaled and have kind of a lower data, data pool. And then there's even companies that, like Federated Wireless, that are using unused spectrum that's going commercial this fall, that are using unused spectrum to launch similar to kind of a wireless LAN. I don't know what they're doing on the wireless WAN side. They're going to be working with the carriers as well as possibly going directly to the enterprise to help with an alternative connectivity option for connecting the Internet of Things. So, and at that pace, I think there may be some other things that might pop into the realm. But right now, I think cellular kind of is the main stance right now for a lot of what we're seeing.
I can add something.
Smaller.
I know that some of the platform companies, they have the rules engine. It won't address all of the data, but the rules engine can say, like, for example, only send me the data if it changes significantly between this and that. So you have over 100 plus platform companies there, and then usually with the platform, there's software that goes on the device as well that enables you to send intelligence down to the device. Mm-hmm. So it goes on the shim, it goes in the smart meter, it goes into the roadside sensor or whatever. But then that would have some intelligence to tell it, only send me the data this time. So that way it's some kind of processing. And then maybe that would go along with changes that are going to be done in the architecture as
And
well.
I think that's one thing we heard last year, that there was quite a bit of data collection that was going on that was unneeded. There's certain assets that are out there that may need to only be pinged once every hour or once a day. And so we have to put together some priorities and some around the data collection and how often are we pinging that data, because that's another way to better manage that traffic congestion of all of that data that you're collecting, is really prioritizing how important is it, how often do I need to access it, and what does it mean once I have something that triggers that there needs to be a reaction or something happen from that data. Tim?
Yeah, I think we're getting, thankfully, away from the whole concept of pervasive wireless, pervasive connectivity. It just doesn't work, because it would be an infrastructure problem. So I'll give you some examples of, Nadine brought up the firefighting incident. That thing is not pinging all the time. It's only pinging when it's urgent to find that firefighter. They are putting sensors in construction workers' helmets that won't go on. There's a gyro in there as
Right.
well,
Yeah.
until the gyro says the worker has fallen, and then it will start to ping and say he's fallen. Scott's Miracle Grow is making smart mulch that talks to smart buildings, but they're not conversing all the time. The building's only asking it maybe once a week is, are you dry today? Do you need more water? Because we can get a really big fine if you're dry. And it says, yes, the sprinklers come on, so it's doing stuff like that. And the other aspect is we're getting really great at finding ways to retrieve the data really fast, because we're dealing with a lot of data. So the Jet Propulsion Laboratory has started using Alexas to retrieve data. So instead of having somebody type at a terminal and it might take 15, 20 minutes to retrieve data, and you're tying up all that computing power, they found that Alexa can do it really, really fast. So they have groups of Alexa now doing this for the Mars landing, getting all this data, and the scientists are working with that. So we're getting smarter at that rather than keeping everything on, keeping the lights on, so to speak.
Interesting.